All right, cool. Hey, Shane.
Lee, how you doing?
Good, good. So, this is Shane Bigelow, CEO of Champ Titles. Shane, if you can, I think enough of this, the people that are going to listen to this know about Champ, but it'd be awesome if you can give us a quick overview of what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Champ is a company that replaces aging title and registration systems inside of DMVs around the country. And our model is to solve the problems that the constituents of the DMVs have. So, when I say constituents, I mean car dealers, insurance carriers, fleet operators, lenders. By providing them technology that solves their problems, we think they'll be happier with the government, and we'll make some money along the way too.
Cool. Well, I do have to ask because I think there's two separate people. There's some that love the startup world, and then there's some that love the kind of corporate world, and a lot of times they don't mix. So what? And it looks like you've done both. Um, where do you fall in that? How did you survive the boredom of a corporate world? No, I'm just joking. But how do you you sound like an entrepreneur based on your experience, but how was that process of kind of working for larger organizations and then going back to starting your own again?
Well, I think a lot about it when we are hiring people. I think certain people can work well within a grittier, entrepreneurial, younger company type of setting, and some people can't. Some people need, the the slower pace or the multiple layers of decision makers that are sort of customary in larger companies in order for them to feel comfortable and excel. So I don't think there's any right or wrong where people end up. It's just knowing the type of person you are. You should figure out which of those settings probably makes the most sense for you. You're right. I have done both, from really big companies like Cisco to smaller public companies as well, to other smaller public companies. One we sold to Cisco, and the other was a Wall Street firm. And now back in young company world, or I suppose at this stage, going on our year 6, but yeah, startup world too. I what For me, it's not about the setting or the daily rigors of the job. It's all about the challenge, right? After a while, I think you can find a lack of challenge in any setting, and if you find the lack of challenge, for me, that's not fulfilling. So what's fulfilling to me is to find the challenge and go and try to achieve something fun in a new way, or a different way, or a better way than people have before me. And so the challenge right now for me is inside of the young company world, and I'm loving it.
Cool. Yeah. So that actually is a good segue to the Champ origin story. So two questions around that. When did this idea come about? Was this something that you've had in the back of your head for years? You're like, someone's got to do something about this. Fine, I will. Or was it a certain event that happened, a bad DMV experience, something that triggered you to go, hey, this could be something. Let's start this. So what was the starting point for Champ, or the idea? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, there are probably a few bits and pieces along the way that contributed to it. I have a co-founder. He's not operating in the business. He's chairman of our board. He was a major, it was a very large vehicle retailer. So certainly his influence and understanding the pains and the pressures of the dealer community as it relates to title and registration was a big part of us, getting into this space. My background also contributed to it. The first startup was in ostensibly the automotive lending space. I had written an algorithm to help banks more efficiently process their loan and lease portfolios, specific really to auto loans. And, as with the loan from an auto loan, you have to, as a lender, put the lien on the title. Well, I was trying to solve the loan problems back then because things weren't automated and weren't in paper, or were mostly in paper and weren't digital. But I did observe the titling problems. So I then saw it from a lender perspective, 25 or so years ago. Fast forward a bit on Wall Street, I had a few experiences that exposed me to the problems with assets not being properly titled or not having the provenance of an asset properly understood. And one that is, I think, particularly visual, and contributed on some level to my understanding of the space, but not necessarily to the idea specifically for Champ. Was I was in Zambia trying to lend money on some fairly eclectic assets that happen to be cattle. And we had partnered with a couple of charities to try to do this because we were trying to lend money on cattle to women, because women were much more productive with the ownership of cattle than men were. And it helped their families a lot more. It helped the economy a lot more. The agrarian side of their economy could grow more if as well. So there were a lot of plus sides to lending money to women to buy cattle. The problem was that the charities were doing it on a small level, and we wanted to make it bigger. We wanted to put a lot more money in and help a lot more people. But we couldn't ultimately get it done because we couldn't show that the asset, the cattle, we couldn't show who owned it. We couldn't figure out who owned that asset in any other way than just the sort of local knowledge that said, well, this person owns those 5 and that person owns those 10, and this person owns those 3 cattle, right? And that wasn't good enough, because if you're a lender and you're think about those liens, you're trying to lend money on something, you want to know what your collateral is. And you want to know that not only to satiate your own risk profile, but because you're probably taking pieces of that loan and selling it to other folks. Well, there was no way to do that. There was no system of record in the government space that would enable a lender to tie in and say, I've given the loan on this asset. And so we ultimately couldn't help the people we wanted to help or do the deals we wanted to do. And that resonated too. So when, fast forward a few years later, I'm talking to my co-founder. We're trying to figure out how can we build something that really helps government in the space that we understand. We kept circling around this same concept of, well, there is a real problem with titling. Titling is not easy. It's very paper-based. The systems, the last major entrant into the space was nearly 20 years ago. So there hasn't been a lot of innovation. And, can we bring technology into a space and digitize a largely paper process to enable all of these other things to occur, so that going back to Zambia one day, we might be able to sell a Champ system there and enable people to be able to acquire the loans and acquire the insurance on the assets that they own, which with no ability to do that today, or limited ability to do that, that's a very expensive opportunity cost for them. We take it for granted in the United States that you can get a loan on an asset because it's easier to prove your ownership, but you shouldn't take it for granted in the rest of the world. So with Champ, we're solving these problems for the constituents of the DMVs to start, right? The dealers, the fleet operators, the insurance carriers, and the lenders, and all other service providers, right? We're not here to displace any service provider. We're here to offer an easier way for those service providers to do business with the state.
Cool. Yeah. So I guess you heard it here first. Champ started from cattle in Zambia. That's going to be the title of the podcast there.
Perfect. Great. What could possibly go wrong with people misinterpreting that?
No. So yeah. And, just specifically talking about titles, title fraud has always been an issue. It probably always will be. What do you think was fundamentally broken with the way states were handling titles before, or now currently? What was the main issue there? What was really the core problem?
Well, you mentioned one of the problems today is that fraud is too easy, right? It's not, you give someone a good printer and a decent graphic design knowledge, and you can mimic pretty much any paper title in the country. That's not good, right? But you can solve that by having something that looks a lot like a boarding pass to an airline become your representation of your ownership. And you can only do that if the system of record that QR code is going back to is robust enough to be able to handle that amount of inquiries or those amount of transactions, and do it without having, necessarily someone have to sit there and hit a button to validate a transaction. So what was missing in the industry that helps the fraud today and creates a ton of other inefficiencies for each of these constituents. But what was missing is a system robust enough to be able to handle the types of transactions that people are accustomed to performing today. As I mentioned, the last real entrant into the space was 20 years ago. The technology that was deployed then to bring something out of a mainframe into what effectively looks like a website from the early 2000s was a big move forward at that stage. It was probably 20 years before that the previous new entrant had shown up. There are very high barriers to entry in this space, and that causes this lag effect of technology not making it into the DMV space for quite some time. We're trying to remedy that by bringing a cloud-based SaaS offering that continuously upgrades and can always stay current and can enable all of the service providers to these various constituents to connect in and offer the best possible technology experience that's similar to what people have today when they check out of Amazon. And that's what was missing, right? The big thing that was missing was that innovation wasn't there. And so many of the states are still running on 40, 50, 60-year-old mainframes. And that's a real problem.
Yeah. And what is, because I got to assume there's some states like, West Virginia and a couple others that are like, this is awesome. Yes. We're all in. What do we do? Let's partner up on this. We want to get, we want the latest and greatest in technology. And then there's some that are at various stages. But from, a business standpoint, what has been the biggest challenge for you guys, or not challenge, but maybe misconception or working with these state motor vehicle agencies to kind of understand and let it click that this will enable more revenue, less fraud, all the benefits that come along with the CHAMP system?
Yeah, I think there are states that want to build technology internally, and there are states that understand that they should instead enable the best technologies within their ecosystem. And I think that's shifting. I think the old school way of thinking about it was we build the technology, which, said another sort of tongue-in-cheek way. There was a long period of time where government had an identity crisis and thought they were a software company. And so they were building their own technology. And then, sort of the consultants came along and said, well, you know what, maybe we could tell you a different way to do this. And then the consultants became a software company, which probably isn't the best thing for anybody because it just makes the fees and our own individual taxes go up. What's available now, as more things move to cloud and SaaS became something that we're all very comfortable with and probably use on a daily basis, whether it's, an app we use or a subscription we have or something like that. But what became available was that it's really government's job to enable the best access to technology for their constituents. And I think more and more states, more CIOs, more DMVs, more governors are realizing that if I just enable the enterprise community to sit on top of my access to these constituents, that's a better way for the problems of my voters in my state to experience ultimately what I can bring to them with their tax dollars. Or in our case, they don't even use tax dollars. We don't charge the government. And I think that's another shift, is that you're starting to see more vendors like us who are saying, I don't want to contribute to the massive amounts of government debt or budget out there. I don't want to be the one sucking the money out of the government system, which is really just taking it from taxpayers. Instead, I'm going to put up services that the government makes available to the constituents, and I will live or die by whether or not those constituents use it. I will get paid for performance. If it works, then I will get transaction fees, and they will get a better, swifter transaction that's better for their bottom line and better for their users. If it doesn't work, they won't use it, and I won't get paid. And I think that's a much fairer way for government to enable, really what should be performance-based fee realization for anyone that's a supplier to government.
100%. Yeah, you both have vested interest in it on the success. It's not like, you say, okay, pay us 50 million, then we'll get to it at one point.
Right.
We're both in this together, and it's what's best for both parties and the constituents. So that is, for sure the best model. When it comes to, because as a service provider ourselves, what we found is the best sort of relationships that we have with different states is like they look for our input on how to deliver that solution. So for example, like in California, a couple of years ago, they moved to electronic report of sales for vehicle sales instead of the paper report of sales. And so the California DMV looked at service providers to go, okay, how do you guys see this going down? Then we were able to work together as a group to provide input on what would be the best end result and user experience for the dealers. And so that has been those types of open communication feedback, rather than the state saying, hey, this is how it is and this is what it is, and it's like, that's great, but is not necessarily what the dealer needs or that end user needs. So kind of that collaborative approach seems to work best. Hold on, I got some questions written down.
Well, while you're looking at that, on that particular topic, I couldn't agree more. I find that most people in government really, truly wake up wanting to help their citizens every single day. And it takes a special kind of person to dedicate yourself to public service, working in the government, because sometimes it is a thankless job, unfortunately. And these people that work there really do, by and large, want to help the constituents that they have. And sometimes they don't always know how, and it's not their fault. It's just they're so busy with processes and big old systems that they don't have time to actually sit back and say, well, wait, how could we solve these problems? But more and more states are waking up to the idea of, well, I should expose myself to the constituents. I should get more of them around the table and say, well, what are you really looking for? And, I think what they hear oftentimes is, well, we're looking for an experience that looks like what an experience we have everywhere else, right? Everywhere in the non-governmental world, we are used to doing things on our phone, doing things digitally, doing things remotely. And that's what we want. So, how do you make that happen? And you're right that the entities that are just going out and saying, I'll charge you a big fee up front and we'll get to it later, that doesn't help the constituents. And I think the constituents are waking up to that too.
Yeah, no doubt. And with West Virginia, we'll get into that. I'd like for you to explain that in layman's terms for people out there that are still trying to understand it. But I got to think that the internal employees of West Virginia are probably over the moon when it comes to having a modern, technology platform that they can utilize to do their work and process their transactions. So that's got to be refreshing compared to some green screens or those big mainframe computers. So
I think they're very happy about it. They've been very kind with their compliments about the processing times dropping, the amount of work they can do increasing on a daily basis. So I think does make them happy, but it makes them happy because it's also what they've come to expect in their own life. That stuff on their phone, stuff on their computer just kind of works, and the old stuff doesn't work all that well, right? So
with West Virginia, if you can explain to people from specifically with the clearinghouse, West Virginia Title Clearinghouse, if you can explain in very basic terms or layman's terms what is going on there, what is the benefit, and who can benefit from it, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Obviously I can't speak for the state. Their legislation sort of speaks for itself, but I can speak for my I suppose interpretation of what they're working to achieve with our technology and a lot of willing people inside of the state and inside of the title ecosystem. So the first thing was they took our system and took their processing time down from 45 days to near real time. So the first thing was, let's get our own house in order and let's make this the best system in the country in terms of response times and turnaround times. And I think they've done that. But the next thing was, well, how do we offer competitive services into the title ecosystem that will make people want to do more business through us? And the analogy that I use is that of Delaware for C corporations, right? So Champ Titles is a C corporation. The last time I was in Delaware that I remember, I was a kid going to the shore. So why are we incorporated in Delaware? Well, Delaware made it easier for companies to incorporate there. Most C corps are incorporated there. Similarly, Citigroup, has a big focus in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Well, why is one of the largest banks in the world in Sioux Falls, South Dakota? Well, it's not because the CEO likes to go hunting. It's because the laws for their type of bank are facilitated and easier there. So states, because of the 10th Amendment, have long been able to offer up services to try to gather business from around the country. And this is great business because it doesn't hurt any other state, but it facilitates the flow of titling because they, as a state, are able to offer what they're calling the title clearinghouse for entities like, multi-state dealers or insurance carriers or fleet operators and their service providers to be able to process titles through West Virginia. And it solves the problem like at the easiest of examples that I can think of. It solves the problem of how does a car dealer that used to sell in a 2 or 5 or 10 mile radius, and now they're selling online, how do they enable that, right? And so you can today sell a car anywhere in the country. The disposition process has actually been around for a while. The problem with selling that many cars nationally is that you need an acquisition process of getting those titles clean and saleable. You need that quickly, because if you're a car dealer and you're selling cars around the country, that also means you're buying cars from around the country. So now you've got cars from all over the country coming to your stores that are also all over the country or in multiple states. And you're sitting on dead inventory until you can get a saleable title. And so West Virginia is making the process of taking that out-of-state title, moving it into a West Virginia title, holding it digitally, and then enabling the dealers to sell it online or around the country. And when they do, taking that title and either printing it, and I hope one day sending it digitally to another state. But right now, it gets printed, sent to the other state so that the state of the buyer can get their proper title, registration, and tags. And that's the acquisition and disposition process, and West Virginia is making the acquisition part easier. It's the same for insurance carriers and fleet operators. They have to buy a lot of cars either because of total losses, so they're buying a car from a policyholder, or fleet operators just have many cars to deal with on a daily or minute by minute basis in many cases for like a rental car company. How do they make it easier for that process to be managed and appropriately pay taxes and fees around the country? Well, that's what West Virginia is enabling with the title clearinghouse.
Got it. So if I'm Hertz and I'm acquiring all these vehicles, instead of having to go state by state to title that in my name, in Hertz name, individually by state, I would just go through West Virginia for any vehicle that I acquire. It gets titled in West Virginia. When I'm going to sell that vehicle, West Virginia, the state of West Virginia releases a paper title to me, to Hertz. or to whoever I'm selling it to, rather. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a little more nuanced than that. I call the title clearinghouse sort of a 90% solution. There's always going to be some exceptions, right? There are some states that want you to title a rental fleet or a fleet a different way because of apportioned registrations or taxes or other things. And so it depends a little bit on the type of vehicle we're talking about as well. But, whether you take a fleet or a dealer or an insurance carrier, the concept is you need to move a title from the seller to you, the buyer, right? So the commonality is you need to take it from a seller to you, the buyer, and then eventually you need to take it from you, the buyer, to whoever's buying it from you, the new buyer. And so that first process is difficult to do with speed. So if Hertz or an insurance carrier or a dealer was acquiring a car, what they'd want to be able to do is to acquire the car and have it titled swiftly, and ideally have that paper title held digitally. So no more paper title, have it digitally now in West Virginia. And then when you need to transact on it as that dealer or fleet operator or insurance carrier, you can instead hit a button and enable that to be moved into paper if your buyer exists in a paper world. Now, hopefully more of the buyers will start to exist in the digital world because other states will play catch up and move. And we're seeing it all the time, states moving to or wanting to move to a digital ownership structure in terms of not having the piece of paper reflect their ownership, but the digitization of that ownership structure. And I think that'll happen. I think eventually, it'll be quite a bit easier to move digitally from one place to another. But in the meantime, West Virginia is enabling this transaction natively digitally for you, the constituent, car dealer, fleet operator, insurance carrier, and then ultimately, if you have to get it to print, you can get it to print.
Got it. Cool. So I guess the other, if I'm reading this right, Shane, correct me if I'm wrong. The other, I guess, you would have to have the CHAMP system in place in order for this clearinghouse to be truly effective because of the processing time, right? So CHAMP enables the state to process these titles faster from several, 8, 10, 12 weeks out to maybe within a week or a couple of days or a day or whatever that time frame is. So that's the other incentive to have it go through West Virginia is not only will it be a central hub, central clearinghouse, but it'll also be a lot quicker of a turnaround than essentially any other state not using the CHAMP platform. Is that?
I see, in any other state, there are structural or technical limitations that exist that slow down their ability to process titles quickly. Maybe they've got a paper-based process. Maybe they've got a manual review process without any automation attached to it. Maybe maybe everything has to dead end in paper, so you're waiting on printers and ink and other things. If you can streamline all of that and tie it all together with all of the other various systems and integrations that a DMV requires, then I suppose you've recreated what we've created here. But I haven't seen other DMVs have access to something that supplies all of the connectivity and speed that we've been able to supply. And I think you're right that a clearinghouse at scale would be nearly impossible to pull off unless you have this advanced technology. I think the other big problem is that in many states that have, sort of winked and nodded at some of these transactions occurring, and maybe it's not exactly complicit with their laws, but there hasn't been too many transactions like it going through. That's gone away in West Virginia. They've codified it, written it into law, passed it unanimously in the House and the Senate, and the governor signed it. So you as a car dealer, fleet operator, insurance carrier, lender, you can know comfortably that you are working 100% within the guidelines of the actual law and not just what, a DMV kind of let go because you asked nicely. And I don't think other states have really codified the changes at the level that West Virginia has to make people, just like Delaware, just like South Dakota did, to make people feel really comfortable with this type of transaction flowing through at scale, throwing through another state.
Got it. Cool. And so from a timing standpoint or practical standpoint, got signed into law, governor signed it. Is this something that, is effective immediately and West Virginia can take on right now, this clearinghouse, or is there still some infrastructure that needs to be built out or processes before it, goes live, so to speak?
Yeah, the law is passed, and what has to happen now is that some of the forms and some of the ability to apply for the special national dealer's license that you'll need, or other licenses that you might need in West Virginia, that process is being put in place. And so our estimate is that sometime in very early July, you'll see the first transactions flow through, and the West Virginia, like we talked about earlier, has been a state that's been highly receptive to the needs and desires of the constituents. And so I think they're trying to do their best to make sure that those needs are met as well as possible within this new title clearinghouse world.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like there's got to be some vetting process for businesses to be able to utilize this clearinghouse. It just can't be anyone. So there's got to be some sort of licensing or approval process. So okay.
There's licensing and there's bonding requirements, and so it is limited to those that can qualify for those things. And that's the intent of that, is to make sure that you've got good actors doing good things on the system, and that they're vetting who is able to do that in an appropriate governmental way.
Got it. Are those licensing, the bonding requirements, is that known yet? Is that out there, or is that recent?
Yeah, there are some guidelines around the bonding, but not yet around exactly what the process is for the licensing to be applied for. It's just a matter of really locking that down. But it'd be fairly typical to what you might see in other places with call it first line or second line service provider type of licensing. I think in our space that those are the terms that are often used. So yeah. It's kind of similar to that.
Got it. Cool. That makes sense. Awesome. Well, I think that answers a lot of the questions about the West Virginia thing. I just had a couple more, kind of fun questions for you, Shane, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure. Of course.
So I always like dreaming of like what the future looks like. And it's an exciting time for DMV right now. That's probably the nerdiest thing I've ever said in my entire life, but I'm more enthusiastic and excited about the technology that's going into DMV right now, especially with Champ. But if you were to look out, 25, 50 years, just into the future, how do you see title transactions occurring? What would that look like for, let's say, a dealer or even a private party? What does that look like for you?
If we're taking the I think you said 25 or 50 year look, right? So, I'm going to make the presumption that lots of states, if not all of them, have gone through the process of moving into sort of a digital landscape, that paper is largely eradicated, right? We're saving right now, just in West Virginia, I think it's north of 15 or 18 million pieces of paper a year, right? So the environmental damage is reduced. I think you'll see a lot of states looking at not only the paper reduction process, but also the environmental damage of cars sitting around being unable to be recycled or sold because they're waiting on title, right? This happens in salvage yards today. And as we look to the sort of greening of our environment, I think more states will look at digitization as a way to actually help their ecological systems as well. But I think from a user standpoint, whether it's a dealer or fleet operator, insurance carrier, lender, or consumer, I think that experience can live, completely digitally. I think as a consumer, opening up, I don't know what it'll be, 50 years from now, but the equivalent of your Apple Wallet, and clicking on your title and sending it over to somebody else in exchange for funds, and having all of that process correctly and be reflected in the system of record correctly, just like a Venmo transaction does. I think that is 100% within reach, and I don't even think it'll take 25 years.
25, right.
And so, I also look at 25, 50 years. I'm excited about the idea of fractional ownership, right? How do you own a car for the period in which you're using it, right? So do I have to pay the tolls, the taxes attached with the mileage in my Tesla automated vehicle that's self-driving, where I'm just a passenger, right? So do I technically own that for that 10-minute ride to and from the office? Maybe, right? Maybe the transfer can be that fast that's how government collecting taxes, that's how we're looking to the massive fleets of autonomous vehicles that will probably be ushering us around, and how we pay for things like fixing the roads or managing, if they're air vehicles, managing vehicles going through the air. Like, there has to be a payment for that infrastructure. And one way to do it is through, your portion of the contribution to that usage should help pay for that, right? And that's basically a usage tax. So I could see that all becoming reality if you can start to just like we did with cell phones and moving from corded phones to portable phones to cell phones. Why you get all those little taxes along the way and you pay all those fees to the carriers is because they have to pay for all the upgrades to give you all the things you now demand on your phone. But you're happy to pay it. Maybe happy is the wrong word, but you're willing to pay it because you get so much on your phone now. Well, what would you expect from your car in 50 years? I think you'd expect that type of customized experience. And with that will come more infrastructure needs. And I think the responsible thing to do, I'm a fiscally conservative, socially liberal kind of guy. My view is, let's not run up a big government tab for that, right? Then we all have to pay it as taxpayers. Let's figure out how to make it efficient for government, efficient for the users. And I think we'll all be a lot happier. In 50 years, it'll be a lot of fun to hop in your autonomous vehicle and know that you owned it for 15 minutes and paid your fair share.
Yeah, no doubt. That's funny. Yeah, I have a subscription with Autonomy. They do the subscription Teslas.
Sure.
And it's pretty neat. It's a weird feeling of like, I drive it. It's my car, but for the most part, I take my kids to school in it and run errands and go to the store and I have whatever I want. But there's this also feeling of like, it's not this depreciating asset that I own that's just rotting in my driveway. Right. So I can see that too in the future of like, hey, on-demand autonomous vehicles, you hop in, it's yours essentially for that 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. And then when you don't need it anymore, it's not yours. So yeah, I can definitely see that being the future. And then last question, because you mentioned, the cattle in Zambia, but what excites you about the future of Champ? I know you're starting with the title world, but is that something that you already have your eyes set on other applications, or what excites you the most about what you guys are doing right now and what the future of Champ looks like?
I think there's a real opportunity for helping the world by providing the access to better systems of record, right? If you have a good system of record, you can track the ownership of assets, the provenance of those assets, so they're real, you have the right claim on them. You can borrow money against them. You can insure them. You can do these transactions that actually help you gain not only fiscal leverage, but like the leverage you want out of the things you own, right? And we sort of take some of this for granted with homes and cars in the US today, because most people have a loan on their house or many people have a loan on their car. But that's not necessarily the case in a good way throughout the rest of the world. And if we can take our technology here and enable economic growth by people taking assets, particularly movable assets, using our technology through their government to be able to register those assets and own them, and then allowing the marketplace of lenders, insurance carriers, and service providers to offer additional services on top of it. I think we create a lot of economic freedom for people that maybe don't have it today. I think we create business opportunities for, who knows, maybe it's the folks that want to buy a fleet of autonomous vehicles and manage that as a business, and that's their business and how they make their living. But we enable that because that technology is required at the government level in order to be able to have a business that can do those things. Because if the government's not supplying that to you, it's going to be very difficult for you to transact on those assets, and your expenses are going to go up, and you'll look at it and you'll never start that business. So I hope that what we're doing is contributing to a world where businesses are created on top of the technology that we're offering through government today.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you, Shane. I appreciate the time as always. And yeah, look forward to the next phase of what Champ is offering. And yeah, excited. Thank you.
Hey, anytime. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks. And thanks to Tony Hall for recommending me coming on your show. This is wonderful.
That's right. Yeah. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I got your check. All right. Thanks, Shane.
Thank you.
Bye.